SECfans.com talking about a hypothetical computer model. We did one of these last year with Alabama and Georgia midway through the season. And we're going to step outside the SEC for this one with two fan bases that are really familiar with our channel. And we're really familiar with both your teams. Done a lot of games for both y'all last couple of years, last few years actually. We're going to put our computer model to the test for Notre Dame versus Ohio State. Let's say these two teams met up, and today was the first round of the playoffs. Let's say second round. Let's say Alabama's out of it, Georgia's out of it, and y'all are facing each other in the national championship game. Based on the data we've had so far this year, we're going to discuss quickly what the model thinks about these two teams and what we think about the matchup. We're not going to predict a score because that's silly. They're not playing each other. We'll do it if they play each other later. But these are two teams that might be on a collision course, and we wanted to discuss it real quick. It's fun. Whatever. It's our show. We get to do it. Notre Dame fans, Ohio State fans, you know the drill. If you haven't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button. You'll find us to be rather objective. No trash talk. Well, we will trash talk you if you bring us bad data. But in this video, we're not going to trash talk the Big Ten. We're not going to trash talk Notre Dame. We're SEC fans. We talk about a lot of SEC football, but we also talk a lot about your teams. We are rather objective. Ask anybody in the comments that have followed us so far this year. Okay, Notre Dame coming off a big win against Stanford, 38-17. Ohio State, obviously, the huge emotional win over on the road at Penn State. I think given what we've said so far about both of these teams this year, we can start with, the offenses. I would say Ohio State took a step back. Granted, it was against a really good team in Penn State, but our perception of this Ohio State offense, especially at quarterback, took a step back, and Notre Dame took a step forward. And I want to talk about Notre Dame first. Ian Book is the obvious thing that everybody's going to go to, that he changed the complete dynamics of this offense, and Wimbush was holding them back. I would argue that just as important as Ian Book is getting Dexter Williams off of suspension. It's something that we didn't talk about in our Stanford preview. I wish we would. I think he is playing at a level, or showed against Stanford, that he's at a level at running back that they missed so far this year, that they had last year in Adams and needed to keep this offense going. Am I crazy in saying he's just as an important addition to this Notre Dame offense in terms of overhauling the offense and making them a serious weapon as adding Ian Book?
I think there's probably a fair chance that's true. To date, Notre Dame had struggled in trying to get the running game up to par. And we've talked about this off and on. Videos talking about Notre Dame, talking to fans and forums and things with different people trying to interact. A lot of our opinion on Brandon Wimbush and why he had struggled and why he ended up losing the job this year is Brandon Wimbush was a very effective quarterback when their running game could get 6 yards per carry. And a lot of that had to do with whatever Josh Adams was able to do and how effective the run game was in general. When Wimbush wasn't able to get the running game going, partly due to departures in the offensive line, it's still a very good offensive line, but last year's offensive line at times was utterly dominant. And due to the lack of running backs, it changed the entire complexion of the offense. And it's not like Wimbush suddenly forgot how to play football over the course of the year. The truth is, Wimbush and the whole offense was suffering because they didn't have a running back that was able to move it. Dexter Williams came in, just one game into the season, 21 attempts, 161 yards, 7.7 yards per carry. Unsurprisingly, they almost look like a totally different team against Stanford. And I really think it's because with the ability to run the ball with a high level of success, the RPO offense you have only works if you're running the ball well. And we've been really ragging Auburn this year. We ragged them at the beginning of the year, coming out of even the Washington game, which they won, because their offense shuts down when they can't have the inside run. I think there's a lot of similar principles to what Notre Dame is doing now versus what Auburn did, versus what Alabama did the past couple of years. If you can't run the ball for 6 yards per carry, that offense doesn't work as well. Ian Book is a more balanced guy, so he gives them more options, but having Williams in there and his ability to run the ball at a high per carry clip does tremendous things in terms of making the other team have to play the run, which opens up the RPO concepts they want to execute, and it lets their offense function at a high level.
All right, so on the other side of the ball, we saw Dwayne Haskins finally sort of lead this team in a game where the game was on the line. And he stepped up, the playmaker stepped up. One of the things you said going into this game, one of the criticisms you had for him was holds the ball too long and doesn't necessarily put up points in keeping with maybe the yardage or the high completion percentage that he has. Another thing that came up in the comments a lot was that he got a lot of drops, and that was uncharacteristic. His statistics would be even better if it wasn't for all the drops, especially the MAC drops against TCU. After the Penn State game, it's starting to seem like that's a component of your offense, and it's baked into the statistics because that's who you are. Walks like a duck, talks like a duck. Y'all got some drops on this team. So, did you see some things against Penn State that scares you a little bit, especially if they're matched up with what looks to be a better defense than I was giving Notre Dame credit for? Shout out to Brian for reminding me of that. Thanks so much. Could that concern you going into a game like this?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and so something we had talked about that I want to elaborate on briefly.
Briefly.
I don't know that, right? Yeah, and I think I don't know that we're going to get much clarity. So this could be weeks later, and you'll hear this, and you'll probably see the same point. Dwayne Haskins was getting a lot of love because of his high quarterback rating and completion percentage against poor teams. That's a typical thing almost in Urban Meyer offenses. The one thing we flagged is in the TCU game, which we are not terribly high on TCU this year. His QB rating dropped, not by any means badly, but it did drop. It went from over 200 to about 156 in the TCU game. Very good mark, but not all world. What we saw against Penn State was another drop. He fell down to 134. In the Penn State game, he looked somewhat mortal, 6.9 yards per attempt, 56% completion percentage. A lot of it was a hostile crowd. It's the first major road game. That's really tough for any quarterback. Again, weird stuff that people didn't seem to think that the TCU game was more, home game, even though it was 80% of Ohio State fans. It's a tough thing to go on the road and win. And the guy pulled out the win, and that may change, but there's signs that Haskins, and I say Haskins, but a quarterback's statistics, like you mentioned with drops, are completely a function of the entire offense. And we're talking about how successful Haskins is, not about him personally. There's a sign that the success Haskins has in a game is affected significantly by the quality of the opposing defense. I don't know that he can be an all-world elite guy against everybody they play. I have a feeling we may see some games. I don't know if the Michigan game will be like this where it's going to drop. And I think that would be a concern against Notre Dame as well, that his statistics are not going to be elite. They're going to be more like they are against Penn State. And quite frankly, Notre Dame is a much better defense than Penn State.
All right. So let's go ahead and see what the model says. This model is going to change over time. We may even revisit this hypothetical if the teams keep winning, or we might have to do the video because they're actually going to play each other in the playoffs. Let's let the model breathe a little bit and see what it says, because I got a feeling it's going to be pretty interesting. I have a feeling because I've already seen it, and it is interesting.
Yeah, we decided to do this before he saw it, but no, it did end up being interesting. It's a good suggestion. So opponent defensive averages. So we look at the percent of opponent production that your defense allows. It's one of the intermediary statistics we generate. I don't know why this isn't a statistic that's just floating out there. It's one thing to say you hold a team to 4 yards per carry, but if you hold a team to 80% of their average, I think that's a more useful number. Notre Dame holds teams to 79% of their rushing averages, which is very, very good, though you can do better. 77% of their passing averages, which is excellent, by the way. Anything under 80%, you're doing really good. It's just hard. It's hard to keep a good passing game in check. Passing games translate more. Run games are much easier to shut down. Ohio State's defense, statistically, even after the Penn State game, is not fantastic on paper. 91% of opponent rushing averages, 102% of opponent passing averages. And the way it basically plays out is because the defenses are skewed, it offsets the fact that Ohio State has an advantage offensively, 5 yards per carry to 9.5 yards per attempt, just 4.4 per carry, 8 yards per attempt when we're modeling this. And it basically balances out perfectly, where Notre Dame is supposed to average 5.75 yards per carry. Ohio State averages 5.70 yards per carry. So down to the 100th, the same per play production, both running the ball at 3.9 yards per carry. And the only difference is Notre Dame has 8.3 yards per attempt to 7.3 yards per attempt for Ohio State. Um, and that's why there's a slight discrepancy that's offset somewhat by the run pass percentages by each team. But anyway, unsurprisingly, given that the offensive production is the same, the model has the scoring almost exactly the same. So the model has Ohio State 31, Notre Dame 30. So a close game, and I think maybe even misspoke. I was talking to Daniel before because it was so close. Looking at the rounding, but it has Ohio State by 1 point. But it is not shocking. Notre Dame's defense is good enough to make up for Ohio State's advantages offensively. These would be two very, very, very evenly matched teams. And I'm sure fans on both sides feel like it's unrealistic to say that they might lose this game versus the other team. But the truth is, these are both very good teams that both have different issues. Might diverge down the road, but right now they'd be very evenly matched.
All right, so we've done a lot of these games this year. We've talked about these two teams a lot this year. Looking at the model, do you think the model has it right that these two teams, if they play today, it'd be a really, really good game and they'd be evenly matched?
I think it does. I think that it's a little interesting coming out of the past several games because when you looked at Notre Dame Vandy or Ohio State when they were playing Penn State, there's repeatedly the model has overestimated how high scoring those games would be. They were a lot tighter than expected. I think both these offenses, again, being run spread offenses, they often don't scale well against better defenses. And the curiosity is if the model is ever going to really be trained to see that, if it's a thing this year or if it was a one off. But it may just be that I think Ohio State honestly, I think Ohio State played a bad game against Penn State and still won. And I think we're seeing a different team from Notre Dame.
True or false? And this is saying a lot considering Notre Dame just faced Bryce Love. True or false? Dobbins and Weber for Ohio State are the best running backs, are better than any running back tandem or group or unit running game that Notre Dame's seen so far this year. And Notre Dame's receiving core as a unit is better than anything Ohio State has seen so far this year.
Ooh, there's going to be some angry fans if I say yes to this because Bryce Love at Stanford, but I would agree with it. I think Bryce Love is an excellent back, but he's kind of by himself. And what Ohio State has is a bunch of backs. I don't know that any of
a bunch of excellent backs.
Yeah, and I don't know that any of them are quite as good as Bryce Love, and that's not a shot against Ohio State. I mean, Bryce Love may be a first round draft pick. There's a decent shot of that with his athleticism being what it is, but they can't line up and pound the ball with Bryce Love at Stanford. And it's something they're running into a lot this year. I think he's a better running back, by the way, than McCaffrey. I was really critical of McCaffrey. I still think McCaffrey is a slot receiver playing running back. Different discussion. But yeah, I think Ohio State would just edge out Stanford, and there's no contest in my view with Michigan, Ball State, Vanderbilt, or Wake. Just no contest. Even though a lot of those teams are pretty proud of the running backs. And then on the other side of the equation, yeah, Notre Dame's receivers are excellent, and I don't think Ohio State's receiving core like that. We called out the fact that McSorley's yard per play production has dropped significantly from 2016 to 17 and 18 because Penn State's receiving core has lost players. They don't have Godwin anymore. And that's affected them. And then outside that, TCU has some really explosive guys with guys like Turpin. They don't have real receiving targets. And oddly, Penn State was the same way. They had a lot of guys that were like 5'10". What Notre Dame has is big physical targets that are able to work an intermediate passing game and able to win jump balls. It's something I've seen as a bit of a weakness from Ohio State in the past. I don't know if it's a weakness this year because they simply have not faced anyone. Again, it's kind of odd with TCU and Penn State having the same issue. I haven't faced anyone that has those kind of receiving threats. So that's kind of an interesting matchup problem, and definitely would be something they haven't faced.
Yeah, and we were high on Boykin and Claypool going into the Michigan game. We left it even higher on them. Look, I think Hamler is a threat, and he showed that against Ohio State. He's a fast guy, but as a unit, and Juwan Johnson is that big guy. He had the crazy catch, but that's about all he did that game. Notre Dame has, I think, lacked a guy to get them the ball because they've got some talent at wide receiver that I don't think Ohio State has seen yet so far this year. All right, so the model's interesting, and it's going to be running through this video, and we'll post it for everybody to look at, and we can maybe revisit this game later on. But I don't want to beat it to death. I just thought it was interesting and thought we should discuss it. And maybe this is really just a video to throw out the discussion, and the better discussion is not had in the video, but in the comments or on the various message boards, etc. But I'll say this, and you tell me if I'm crazy. Right now, I think both of these teams have a very good chance to make it to the playoffs. Like, better than not that both of these teams will make it to the playoffs. What do you think?
I have to agree. I mean, if you look down Ohio State's schedule, nobody's really that impressive. I don't know that they're going to be tested before Michigan. I'm not really a believer in Michigan State this year, and certainly
No,
Indiana,
neither.
Minnesota, Purdue, Maryland, Nebraska. Those are not good teams. And then it's Notre Dame's schedule. Honestly, might be even worse. Virginia Tech all of a sudden loses to Old Dominion. That game doesn't look scary anymore. Pitt, Navy, Northwestern, Florida State, Syracuse, USC. There's a lot of teams that have had a lot of struggles over the course of the season. And one of those may end up being tougher than we expect. But both these teams are going to be pretty heavily favored in all the remaining games. And maybe both of them could well be double-digit favorites in every remaining game. The odds haven't quite been adjusted from this past weekend when they both had big wins. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, and we talked about before. It depends. We did a video on what it would take for Notre Dame to win the playoff. We kind of said the Notre Dame Stanford winner was going to have an inside track. Notre Dame won that handily. The Pac-12 is probably out of the playoff with the Stanford loss. I think that's pretty clear at this point. And so you're pretty much looking at the Big Ten winner, the SEC winner, the ACC winner. Oklahoma is the only one that's probably going to be able to make it out of the Big 12, and Notre Dame. And it's a bit interesting if they were all to go undefeated, but that seems unlikely. But yeah, no, you do definitely have 5 teams playing for 4 slots, so they both have a very good chance of making the playoff.
And I'll go one step further in saying that I could see if Georgia wins out, loses to Alabama in the SEC championship, I could see a situation where an independent and 2 SEC teams get in, because I don't think Oklahoma goes undefeated this year, and I don't think the ACC winner is undefeated this year, which even if the 2 SEC team thing doesn't happen, what this does mean is Ohio State has breathing room to maybe drop a game as long as they win the conference. And I think Notre Dame's got to win out because their schedule is soft, but and not at their own fault. It's not their fault that USC's average, Florida State sucks. Virginia Tech is, I think they're better than ODU, losing to ODU bad, but not a great schedule. Not their fault again. They're going to be favored the rest of the way. It's not, I mean, from a math standpoint, it's not likely that both these teams make it, but from a math standpoint, it's not likely that any 2 teams make it. I could see them both in the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised. And I do think it would be a really good game, especially with Ian Book and Dexter Williams. Tell me this last question I'll ask you. Whether or not mathematically they're set to make it, it's pretty safe to say, I think you said, that they're favored in all their games. Both of these teams are better than any team left on either one of these schedules.
Yeah, easily. Again, they're probably 2 scores better than anyone left on their schedules.
All right, you got any other insights on this game, or should we just, since it's a hypothetical and maybe not a game at all, just kind of let the model speak and have a discussion in the comments?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure people will comment one way or the other, but if you got an argument, back it up with data. We generally try to jump in the comments. The one thing I'll say is, if you post this in a forum or something, guys, outside the SEC's schools, if you tell us you're talking about it and post a link, we try to get on and talk with people as much as possible, while being as respectful as we can of the, we don't want to go post our videos on different forums because it's kind of invading somebody else's space. But if people are already talking about it and you let us know, we'll jump in and join the discussion.
Yeah, guys, Ohio State fans, Notre Dame fans, like Josh said, we will find you wherever you are. We've got on both teams' rivals accounts, and I think 11 Warriors. We've got an account there. We've posted there some. UHND, we've been there as well. we do love it when people share our videos. We're not going to come in and spam anybody else's platform. It's kind of disrespectful. We don't want to do that. But where there is discussion and it's relevant to your team, man, we love doing the videos, but we love just as much getting in there and backing up our points with data on your home turf and having these discussions. It's been so much fun this year. It really has. So we'd love to keep it up. But not only that, make sure y'all to subscribe here as well and comment here as well. We'll engage you wherever you're at. So, yeah, let's do it. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, whatever week it is you're watching this video, and God bless.